but don't mistake that for they're trying to give up, because these people want money. I mean, they so badly want 20% of that market. Some people want to get a hold of that. So this is what's going on with this. This is a paradigm shifting sort of thing. So anyway, it's
well, I mean, busy day.
Yeah, good in a good way, but good busy. But yeah, definitely been running from morning to evening. So anyway,
I know.
Good to be
Mine too. It's into the quarter, so sales is like bonkers right now because everything.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm back to back with you. So
my dogs are looking at me because I haven't fed them yet. They're like, I said, wait. Because usually I feed them and then I got to take them out to go to the bathroom. So it's a production, it's like a 20-minute ordeal. So they can wait another hour. They won't die. They're carnivore dogs anyway, so they're tough. They're good.
There you go.
The last vegans I debated deleted their social media. So
wait, the dude that was
the oil guy, the Nick Hebert guy, like apparently deleted his social media or most of it or something. He went underground. It's kind of funny. Anyway,
is that the dude that you were talking about on Joe Rogan, the one who said all people?
Yeah. I mean, it was such a I was like, I don't even have to say anything. I just let you talk, dude, and you're like debunking yourself. So it was, it was entertaining. Well, let's get started and then we can get rolling. Yeah. And
you've had this business now for a while. You've kind of evolved into a new road of people knowing about you and popularity.
Mm-hmm.
You were just on the Joe Rogan podcast and probably going to be on a lot others. There's a lot going on in this space for carnivore, animal based, or whatever. But I'm curious if there's one thing in general that you think people are missing when it comes to this approach to carnivore. I have something that I think, but I would be curious if you think that overall there's some overarching theme that maybe people are missing that you wish people would understand about it.
Well, I mean, I think the people that are conflating this as a statement on the condition of humanity. I mean, if you read my book, there's nowhere I say humans are obligate carnivores. I clearly say humans are omnivorous. I think this is a therapeutic protocol. I think it's wonderfully effective at disease mitigation, disease reversal, disease remission, whatever term you want to use for that. And if somebody wanted to make it a longer lifestyle, that's fine too. And like I do, I mean, I've literally been on, and I'm not religious about it. It's not like literally 98% of my diet is steak. I mean, I put it on, every day I'm eating steak. I mean, I try to be obvious about that on social media, right? I mean, to that, sometimes I'll have some eggs, sometimes I'll have a piece of cheese. And every once in a while, I'll have a piece of fruit or even a piece of birthday cake. I mean, it's like, but it's like once every 6 months or something. It's insignificantly, a minority. I'm not trying to put myself into some sort of religious sort of, kind of like reverse veganism where, oh my God, if I even touched an egg, I'd, millions of animals would die or whatever they believe. I mean, it's not kind of craziness. So, I mean, I think that is how I wish people would see this as a therapeutic protocol, because I think it really is. And I mean, I just got out of a research meeting and I was talking to a bunch of, people that have money and pairing them with a bunch of researchers who wants to do this research. So we're getting that stuff, going, after much fighting. And, I think part of that is my Joe Rogan appearance complaining about the fact that the friggin' beef industry won't even fund studies on carnivore, which I think is alarming. That has fortunately had the effect that I hoped it would. And it's got a lot of people interested in it and actually funding some of this stuff. So that's good news. I mean, I think that, what do I think the one thing? There's a lot. I mean, my message has not really changed of any significant way since I started this thing. This is my 8th year. The things I was talking about that were effective 8 years ago are still effective today. And it's because the people that showed me that had been doing it for 10, 15, 20 years already. So I don't think there's a lot of, that much that needs to be done. Now, yeah, I mean, everybody's going to want to experiment and tinker and do these things and make proclamations about this. And the more eyes we get on it, the more opinions you have. But at the end of the day, I mean, gosh, it's like anything else. The basics that's really what you need, and then it becomes preference in my view after that. Like I said, if you want to be animal based, you want to be strict carnivore, if you want to put on a t-shirt that says I'm carnivore and proud and make your Instagram handle, carnivore crazy, if you want to eat raw testicles or whatever your thing is, whatever, do that stuff. But is it necessary? In my view, for the vast majority of people, no, it's not. I'm very non-dogmatic when it comes to about this. You know, if you know, like I
Mhm.
said, I tell people do what works for you ultimately. And I think that's where we should, you know, I don't know if this is any significant insight, but I think it should be based upon, you know, getting people healthier, whatever that looks like. You know, obviously I'm not a vegan advocate by any stretch. I mean, and I will concede there are people that have improved their health by going vegan, at least temporarily, and maybe some of them even on a longer term basis. But my hope is that more people will understand that, you know, meat is basically a health food. I mean, I think it really is. I think it is. It has been unfairly and improperly demonized for, gosh, going on 5 or 6 decades now, and that has been at the consequence of, I mean, literally millions and millions of people probably detracted from their health and probably caused some people enormous amounts of suffering and early death. And you know, that's, you know, but as far as, I mean, if you have specific questions, maybe I have a, you know, it's kind of what am I
Yeah.
thinking type of game. I don't know what that is, but yeah, that's my kind of overall approach at this point.
For sure. And I think you'll agree with me on this too, because I do think that there's something that's missing in general with what everybody's perception is of carnivore. You kind of alluded to this in that conversation with Joe, but it's this. There's some people that take this to a cult-like level, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like that. But the biggest enemy, let's say, I think that we're fighting against, I think everybody in health or that's trying to improve their health, is processed foods. And I think so much of what carnivore can do, or animal based, or even people who benefit from vegan, is it allows them, but I'm biased, I would say carnivore does it best. It allows them to remove processed foods from their diet because it balances their insulin levels, and it allows them to not be inflamed all the time, and it allows them to feel satiated, and all these various things that, to me, I think that's the enemy. And I don't think that plants are evil. I think there's a limit. There's probably a certain amount. Maybe you want to cook certain plants, those types of things. But ultimately, the biggest thing that I think a lot of people are missing is that you don't necessarily have to fit into this category, like this box of being a carnivore. It's really, we have to be aware of the what is food and what is not food ultimately.
There's some level of reactionism or defensiveness. Is like, you know, you go out there and say, hey, I ate steak and eggs and my health got better, right? And you know, often when you do that, you get attacked on social media. Oh, you're stupid, you're going to get cancer, you're going to get heart disease, how dare you promote this? So those people feel somehow they need to defend themselves, and so they become very aggressive and, you know, back to these people. And then
Right.
you develop this sort of, you know, like you said, this sort of cult like identity, and being on this team. There's team carnivore and there's team vegan, there's team calorie counter, and all these different teams that we have. And as a physician, you're absolutely right. I think the biggest problem we have in this country and Western society in general, and really globally now at this point, is the heavily reliance on ultra processed food. I mean, we literally have physicians out there that are promoting ultra processed food as, you know, the only solution. We're never getting rid of it. We might as well embrace it. Let's just make
Yeah.
healthier ultra processed food. And oh, by the way, take your, you know, your Ozempic shots or whatever, your semaglutide or your
Mhm.
tirzepatide or whatever the next, you know, latest and greatest drug's going to be. And I do agree with you that, you know, you can design a vegan diet that is 100% processed food. It's really hard to design a 100% processed food carnivore diet. In fact, I'd say it's
Yeah.
literally impossible. So I think that alone, you know, does it. And it's, you know, you know, yes, we need to get rid of the junk out of our diet, but we got to eat something. I mean, there's got to be something to replace that junk food. And I do think that meat in particular is a very incredibly nutritious, bioavailable, you know, protein packed, satiety inducing superfood. I mean, I really do. And I mean, you know, people think about beef, and what do you think about when you think of beef? Well, it's got iron, it's got amino acids, it's got a little bit of fat, it's got a few minerals and things like that. Maybe even if you're really smart, you've heard of carnosine and carnitine. But beef, in actuality, has something like 70,000 individual nutrients. I mean, and a lot of them are phytonutrients, you know, polyphenols and all these wonderful things that we hear about from plants. That's literally in beef. And it's probably, and it not probably, it is just as bioavailable and more bioavailable than it is in plants. And so, um, yeah, I mean, I think that beef is it. I mean, and I think, you know, if you want to flavor it with some seasonings or add a little side dish to it because, you know, it makes you feel better or happy, or you like the variety and taste, hey, go for it. As long as you're healthy, I don't really care. I mean, when I look around,
Yeah.
when I go outside in the real world, occasionally I escape from my house and I go outside and I look around and I see all these people and everybody's sick. I mean, everybody looks you go to the grocery store and half the people are freaking limping around and they're 50 pounds overweight or 200 pounds overweight and they're eating garbage. I look at that and I'm like, man, there's got to be a better way. I mean, we live in one of the most privileged times in all of humanity with the access to resources, to wealth like no one's ever had before. I mean, I live better than Louis XIV right now. And I'm not a particularly rich guy, but I mean, just the fact that I sleep in an air conditioned home. I mean, you think about what we have available to us and yet everybody is obese and sick and depressed and angry. I mean, we literally should be a nation of, jacked, strong, vital people. I mean, I think we have the resource for that. We have the capacity for that, but we choose, in many ways, we're marketed to be sort of these consuming fat sheep. Basically, we're being farmed like livestock and given our drugs.
Yeah, it's like it's all for profit, obviously. And I don't necessarily think that there's anything other. I don't think it started out as anything other than just that. I think World War II, there was a lot of need there to get things overseas to support soldiers and whatnot. We talk a lot about what happened in the 50s and the 60s with how canola oil then came onto the field and changed the whole game, with everybody thinking that saturated fats were evil because of cholesterol, and the Sugar Association funding research. That's something that I'm really fascinated with. Let's talk about these research studies that are going on. There was one with Harvard, and then there was the other one it's not a research study, but it's the UN calling for people to eat less meat. And then I think there was the NOVA study, right? Those three, unless I'm mixing something up there.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few research projects we can talk about that have come out recently. Okay. But yeah, so I think the one you allude to with Harvard was, if the one I'm thinking you're talking about, they declared that red meat increased your likelihood of diabetes by like 62%, I believe is the number they gave as a relative risk. And once again, it's an associational study. It was Walter Willett was, I guess, senior author on that paper, who has been, he's conflicted. We can say, yes, there's conflicts of interest, but just looking at the very nature of that study, what did they include as red meat? Lasagna, sandwiches, they didn't.
Is that literally what they included?
Yeah, that was in the red meat group. If you ate sandwiches, that was considered the red meat group. If you ate lasagna, that was considered the red meat group. So it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not red meat. That's different. But it was counted. They did not calculate for sugar consumption in either of the groups. So it was like, well, what about if this people is eating more sugar? We didn't count that, So, it's just poor quality data. John Anitis at Stanford has said, look, all these epidemiologic associational data in nutrition have been an absolute, utter waste of time. We've wasted literally billions of dollars studying research that doesn't tell us anything. At best, it generates hypotheses. And we keep doing that because it gets headlines. It's easy research to do. We'll go dig through the NHANES data and like pull correlations out there and call it, some revolutionary study. That is not science. That's not a scientific experiment. That's just, looking at observations and not, there's so many, as you probably know, there's so many potential confounders and issues with those types of studies that, in my view, it's not even worth doing them anymore. We already have, so we have the theory that red meat is bad for us. That's been shown in theory. Why don't we actually test it in a real sense, in a way? And that's why I'm such an advocate for carnivore diet studies, because my sort of belief is if red meat is bad for us in a really significant way, based on what you believe, then let's do a carnivore study. And what's the outcome going to be? According to you, these people are going to get really, really sick. Now, according to my clinical observation, they don't get sick. Not only do they not get sick, but they get incredibly healthy. So one of us is right and one of us is wrong. So let's put it to the test. And like I said, fortunately, I'm finally to the point where I'm getting people to be able to seriously consider funding these studies. I've got researchers interested in doing that. And so that's a thing on Harvard. You mentioned the NOVA study. That was
on the Harvard one, really quick. Was that one, do we know who funded that one? Was there anything to do with the Sugar Association there? Because that seems to be a continuous theme, and sugar wasn't
I can't remember the
that?
funding. There was an analysis of that study. I don't remember if there was a funding issue. There were all kinds of issues with that. But, Walter Willett, who is the senior author, has taken money, all kinds of money from industry. Again, that doesn't necessarily just besmirch this particular study, but They really could have been funded by either directly by food industry, or it could have been funded through a foundation that takes money from food industry. That's like the recent Stanford twin study, which the same sort of thing has happened. So yeah, funding is a problem. But you got to get studies paid for by somebody. It has to be an interest in it.
How do you figure that out? Like, can the average person, go online and find an accurate view of this study and who funded it? Because this is why I ask, right? I'm having on John Abramson next week. And John, he wrote the book called Sickening, if you're familiar with that, but it's about how big pharmaceuticals, how the system works essentially in the United States and worldwide. And what his biggest point is, one of them, is that the peer-reviewed studies that doctors use to understand what to advise their patients to take, they review the peer-reviewed studies before they suggest something, because they want to know that their peers approve of it. Well, the problem is that the peers don't actually get a chance to see the data. They just get the manuscript that comes from the pharmaceutical company that funded the project, and it's not actually raw data.
Right.
They
get the pharmaceutical company's interpretation of the data. They don't see raw.
Exactly. And the pharmaceutical company also designed the entire study itself, right? So is there a way that like the average Joe can see these studies and just like Google something and be like, okay, cool, this is who funded it? Or is that just all totally hidden?
The funding should be declared under conflicts of interest. Authors can declare confident. Now, it may be hard. You might have to jump through several levels. You say, this author got this funding from this foundation, and you may know, well, I don't know, who is the foundation? Then you got to look in the foundation's history and where do they get their money from? So a lot of it might be 2 or 3 steps removed. Like Coca-Cola may fund the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation, which may fund, something else, and may fund a study. So with enough, the average person is going to have to do a lot of work to find that information in a lot of cases. And you're absolutely right in regard to not open source or shared data. The pharmaceutical industry will say it's proprietary data. We don't want our competitors to get this data, therefore we won't share it. And that means they can just do whatever the hell they want. They basically throw out data they don't think supports their case, or, change what they're measuring, or, it's yes, there's some problems with science in general. It can be very corrupt.
Yeah. So like, we don't even, for the Harvard study that we were just talking about, where they said basically saying that meat contributes to diabetes and other things, like we don't even factually know who actually funded that. And it could be somebody that we didn't necessarily want involved. And that might go toward the NOVA study as well. I think you're going to that one next.
Well, yeah, I think the NOVA study was a study on ultra processed foods, rather. So processed foods and ultra processed food, there's a differentiation between that. I think ultra processed has to have 5 ingredients or more. It has to have ingredients that are not readily found in the average kitchen, and there's some other things. Things have been altered beyond their normal form and things like that. So there's a difference between processed, like ground beef is processed, right? It's cut up in little pieces, right? It's not ultra processed. So, but the study, I guess the point of that study was to prove Americans eat close to 70% of our calories come from processed food or ultra processed food, right? Not just but ultra processed food. A lot of people say, hey, that's a real problem. That is why we have the obesity, the chronic disease epidemic. And I think there's a lot of validity to that. But the USDA, because USDA's job literally is to promote commodity crops, corn, wheat, soybean, sugar, cotton, peanuts, all that stuff. That's what they do. And where do those ingredients end up? Well, they end up in cornflakes and Cheetos and, bread and, everything is ultra processed, really. And so they want to continue supporting the farmers in that whole industry. And so that's what they're literally doing there to promote that. So if ultra processed food were to be, say, banned, right? We were to ban ultra processed food, you'd wipe out half the farms in this country. You might, could conceivably, right? Short term anyway. And so they said, well, we think that we can make a diet that is at least 80% ultra processed food and still have it be healthy as defined by the U.S. dietary guidelines. This is what the U.S. dietary guidelines say. You need this much potassium and sodium and protein and fat and carbs and fiber and blah, blah, blah. And they found out that they could make a diet that was 91% ultra processed food and still be quote unquote healthy, right? Mm-hmm. That is, that strains credulity. To say that, look, this is a healthy
It's
diet
just bizarre.
when it's all processed garbage. And yet the people at USDA are saying it. Yeah, you can do a healthy processed food diet. We just have these quote unquote healthy, but they got fiber in it. It's got healthy fiber and it's got made with the power of plants and all the crap that you see on the labeling. And so we're seeing a general, because there's some really, as there's a lot of people in social media. There's people that are maybe even policymakers that are starting to sort of wake up to this ultra processed food disaster. And they're pushing back and they're saying, hey, look, this is garbage. I mean, South America, they're literally trying to ban some of these ultra processed foods or heavily tax them, which I don't agree with banning or taxing foods. I think that is freedom of choice and it's problematic, right? Because they'll do it to beef or something else, right? So because there's this growing perception or understanding rather, that this is killing us and it's bad food, they're pushing back and they want to say, no, we're not so fast. Ultra processed food's not bad. Follow the science that we're going to pay for and fund and design and establish. And, oh, by the way, ultra processed food is healthy for you. And incidentally, you can be healthy at any size, and body positivity and obesity is a purely genetic phenomenon where it's a disease and there's nothing you can do about it. It doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't matter how much you exercise. Here, take our shots, take our Ozempic
Right.
or Morgiano or whatever, tirzepatide or whatever the latest one is. So that's the deal with that one.
And the problem with all of this too, like you just said, is that I mean, this is how farmers make a living in a sense, because all of that stuff is going into the processed foods. That's where the demand is, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, sure.
it's challenging too, because I think it's like, where does chicken or the egg? Is the demand there because that's what's available? Is it because it's cheaper? Is it because we've demonized meat so much and other things? I mean, when you first had me on your podcast, we were talking about my history and how I used to have an eating disorder. I used to have all these things. It was because I never felt full. So frustrating, but I also was taught that everybody's taught this, salads are the way to go and all that, right? I mean, it sucks because you're never full and you're just constantly thinking about food. And so that's what you're taught. So is it like that? It's like, what comes first, right? Is it the fact that the farmers need that to survive? Or is it because we have just been so trained by these people who are involved with processed food to believe that processed food is actually good for us? It's a tricky one to kind of
Well,
outline.
to be honest, most people don't care. I mean, you go to the average person, you go, why did you buy what you bought? And they say, I can afford it and it tastes good. I mean, that is the calculus that 95% of the people do to nourish themselves. And if you have cheap food that tastes really, really good, you're happy. You're like, oh, good. I get these crunchy munchies or whatever you want to call them, the little cheesy poofs, as Cartman likes to say. I said, you've got that stuff. And so most people don't question it. So you've got this huge, huge appetite, both on a population scale, on an individual scale, of people that just want to eat ultra processed garbage. And if it's cheap for them, all the better. Great. So this is definitions of the types of foods, right?
Yeah, this is why. So this is what they came up with, the Nova group, like just the way that group one is unprocessed or minimally processed food.
So look
fruit,
at that.
vegetables,
Eggs, milk, meat,
all that.
fruits
So would
and
that be
vegetables,
like,
right? So that's a good diet there. That would be a
that's
diet
good.
that most people would thrive on. I mean, honestly, that's the end of the story. There you go. Eat that and
like
be done.
stick with that.
Yeah.
And then it goes to food processed in the kitchen with the aim of extending their shelf life. In practice, these are ingredients to be used in the kitchen, like fats, oh my gosh, like herbs to be kept in jars, refrigerator, all that. So then you get to group 3, which is actually processed foods. These are foods obtained by combining foods in groups 1 and 2 for domestic use, made up of a few ingredients. And then, like you said, group 4 is ultra processed foods. They are the ones that use many ingredients, including food additives that improve palatability, processed raw materials, hydrogenated fats, modified starches, et cetera, and ingredients that are rarely used in home cooking, such as soy, whatever, all these things, right? So, most things I would say land in group 4.
70% of the U.S. diet lands in group 4. Yeah, for sure.
70% of the U.S. diet lands in group 4. And okay. And like you said, probably most people don't care, or they're unaware, one of the two. But the problem is we don't get that so much of our anxiety or, our people they want to not feel overweight, they want to look good, and they're going and doing all these crazy diets. And like you said, trying Ozempic, and then they're depressed or whatever. It's, in my opinion, it's got to be tracked back to the processed foods, which is in part why carnivore or animal based is so helpful, because you don't crave those things anymore. Like the last time I ate today was 6 hours ago, and I ate a lot. Don't get me wrong. I had like 3 eggs, 4 bacon strips, and like a third of a pound of ground beef, and I'm still stuffed, which is so liberating. Not to sound like I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's one of those things where you kind of have to question how it's just how this all came about, right? So let's go into the thing about the UN too, because the UN now is calling for there to be they're requesting for the US to stop consuming as much meat as it does, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's something called the COP28. That's this sort of global, what is it called? Committee of Interested Parties or something like that, that they meet every year to talk about the climate agenda, right? You know, how are we going to save the world from burning to death or whatever they're talking about, right? And they, you heard some stuff coming out about, and that's the UN and the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization. There was some evidence that they were going to talk about, hey, let's get the Western countries, like Bill Gates has said. And, interesting, Bill Gates, the UN is funded by states, like, US pays money, Canada pays money, Mexico pays money. But the largest individual private donor is Bill Gates, or Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So they have a lot of influence over that. And Bill has said, hey, look, we think all Western nations should go to 100% synthetic beef. I mean, he's said that, online. I mean, maybe he's tempered that a little bit, but that was 2 or 3 years ago. He was proclaiming that. He's obviously invested in these companies, Beyond Meat, Possible Burger, I think, and all the other ones. And so there was, the UN is going to call for a reduction in, they're calling for a reduction in agricultural produced methane, right? And how do you do that? And this is interesting because they had the agricultural, because they say we need to cut back on agricultural emissions because methane is going to cause cow farts are boiling the oceans, right? This is sort of I know it's being a little hyperbolic there, but so now they get to the actual farmer side, the actual ag side, and they come up with this sort of thing. And Frank Mittleiner was there, and I talked to him not infrequently through online and stuff like that. And he said, this is what they're saying. They're saying, yes, we need to cut down on agricultural sector methane, right? That's what they're saying. How do you do that? Well, one way is you kill all the cows, right? Kill all the cows and chickens and pigs and make everybody eat plant-based mush, or some version of that. Cut down 20%. And what they're really they and tell people to eat less beef, particularly eat less ruminant animals, beef and lamb, mostly. That's one way you can do that, but there are other ways that you can do it as well. You can change, genetics. Like for instance, in the United States, we have how many head of cattle? We have 90 million head of cattle. Okay, that's a lot. 1975, we had 132 million head of cattle. We've lost 42 million head of cattle on our land in the last 50 years. Okay. India, 300 million head of cattle. They don't even eat cows in a lot of their regions, right? So they have, China has more cows than us. Brazil has more cows than us. India has the most cows in the world, right? So we have, while we produce a lot of beef, we're very efficient with that. We have very few cows relative to the amount of beef we produce. And so they're saying, well, if we can just improve the genetics in, say, India, where they do kill cattle, they kill more cattle. Most people don't know this. In the United States last year, we slaughtered 34 million head of cattle. In India, they slaughtered 38 million, right? They mostly exported it out of the country. Cattle slaughter depends on the particular state or the state or province in India. I'm not sure what they use. But so the FAO is saying, look, telling people to change their diet is going to have a small impact on methane. What's going to have a bigger impact is changing cattle nutrition, cattle genetics, and various other things, different practices in there. So they're still saying we need to mitigate methane emissions, but the way is not to tell people to force people to eat bugs, as much as I like to complain about that. And I think that's a real concern for some people. So at least for now, as of this meeting, they've kind of backed off. And I think the reason they backed off because all these Klaus Schwab memes, eat the bugs and all that crap that everybody's been screaming about because we don't want to do it. So we have had an impact. We have sort of impacted policy. And I think we need to continue to do that. We need to, and I tell people, not only do we need to be defensive, we need to be offensive about this. We need to go on the offense and say, not only are we going to not eat less meat, we're going to eat more meat. and we're going to stop eating processed foods, and we're going to, greenhouse gas emissions, U.S. healthcare sector, up to 10% of our greenhouse gases, cows 2%, right? Which is a bigger number. Sick people are cows. What's sick people? So I think, when we're talking about changing, saving the planet, whether you believe that is a noble goal or even an attainable goal, if we have anything to do with that or not, at the very least, we can say, don't kill a bunch of cows. It's insane. It's stupid. It's incredibly, unintended consequence disaster. This is what will happen. You'll have more people with iron deficiency anemia, more people with, leucine deficiencies and zinc deficiencies, and, kids that are stunted, I'm talking worldwide. I mean, it's just a nonsense policy. And I think in part due to the fact that there's been such an incredible pushback, a political pushback, a public outcry against us, that they're tempering their message a little bit. But don't mistake that for they're trying to give up, because these people want money. I mean, they so badly want 20% of that market. They want Meatless Monday is 14%. Meatless Monday is 14% of the meat market. Meat market is $1.5 trillion a year. What's 14% of 1.5 trillion? I mean, it's like, what is that? $225 billion a year. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
A lot of money.
Some people want to get a hold of that. So this is what's going on with this.
And it's funny. I was talking to Will Harris. He's the main guy at White Oak Pastures.
I talked to him like 2 days ago. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So he's great. And we were talking about how much meat actually in the States is imported. Majority of our meat here. He was telling, unless you've heard otherwise.
Grass-fed beef is imported. I think not the majority of our beef, but the majority of our grass-finished beef is imported. That's for sure. But the majority of our beef, we're a net exporter of beef.
That's true. But he was saying something about the organic labels ultimately being, was it organic? It was USDA approved organic. I believe he was saying is like it's false. It's a lot of it is imported from other places. So I mean, it's beside the point. I'll have to re-listen to that again. But I could be wrong
what
with
he's talking about. There was something called the Cool Law that was in place from, I don't know what year it came. It went out. It got rescinded in 2015, I think. And the Cool Law stands for COL, Country of Origin Labeling. So they used to say, I think from about 2000 to 2014, if you went to the store and you got a package of beef, it would say product of the USA, and that was true, right? It was made by some guy in Wisconsin or Nebraska, and he raised the animal, he killed the animal, processed it, and you got it in your grocery store. Now, what they do is these big multinational corporations, Tyson, Cargill, JBS, National Beef, they take cows from, like in particular with ground beef, because this is where they really do this a lot. They'll take what they call trim, like when you go to the butcher and they trim a steak, right? All that extra crap they cut off that they throw in the trash, that all turns into hamburger. And so they get that from Mexico, or they get that from Brazil, or they get that from Canada or Namibia or New Zealand or whatever, and they bring it in here and they can do it very cheaply, and they just mix it. So the grocery store hamburger patty might have 25 cow parts, 25 different cows may have participated in that hamburger process. Yeah. So I think that's part of the problem. And a lot of the U.S. producers are saying, hey, look, we want to be able to sell our own products and let people know where it is. Now, does it make a difference or not? Some people say, yes, it does. Other people say it's no big deal. But yeah, Will is right about that. There's a lot of foreign beef, particularly in ground beef, and particularly anything labeled as grass finished, because it's actually cheaper to import grass finished beef from New Zealand and Australia than it is to raise it and sell it here in the U.S., which is bizarre. You think about it, it's the other side of the damn world, and yet they can do it more cheaply. I can't
remember that company that does all the meat. They were like the first one. Oh my God, what is it called? But it's like shipped meat to people.
Butcher Box.
But yes, the majority of their meat is from New Zealand, I believe.
Yeah, either New Zealand or Australia. I think so. One of the two.
Yeah, or Australia, one of them. So let's talk about these preliminary study results that were on the 8th.
Okay. So so this is an interesting sort of thing.
Yeah, and for anybody like listening to talk as if like nobody has any idea, because I don't know that everybody knows.
So the traditional mainstream lipidology, which is a study of the blood in our blood serum, or the cardiology literature, suggests that if you have high cholesterol in your bloodstream over a long period of time, you're going to get heart disease. The higher it is, the longer you have it, the more heart disease you're going to have. That's like the main dogma. It's like high LDL cholesterol or ApoB, which is LDL is kind of a type of ApoB. The more ApoB you have floating around your bloodstream, and the longer it's there, you're going to get heart disease. You're going to get, if you have a lot of it, you're going to get it earlier. And they base it upon something called familial hypercholesterolemia, where these people have a genetic order when their cholesterol goes sky high and they have heart attacks when they're 15 years of age, right? This is what this is based on largely. Well, it so turns out that there is a sort of a weird group of people, which they are saying are weird outliers, and I'm not sure that's the case. But some people go on low ketogenic diets, carnivore diets, low carb diets, and I mean, they feel great. They lose weight, everything feels better, like their diabetes goes away, their blood pressure normalizes, their joint pain, goes away, their libido returns, their mental health gets better, their body composition gets better, they get lean, but their cholesterol goes way, way high. It goes like to this familial hypercholesterolemia. Their LDL cholesterol, which is normally considered a problem if it's over 100 these days, is now not 100, but 400 or 500 or 600 or 800 some cases, right? So you have this subset of the people. And so the prediction would be, if we followed these people over time, what would happen to them? What would you predict would happen to them based on the standard model? The standard model would be they would have a lot of heart disease, right? That's what the model teaches us. Well, it turns out that they followed 100 of these people. Well, they collected 100 of these people that had been doing this sort of low carb, ketogenic, carnivore diet for 5 years on average. And they were old people. They weren't 20-year-olds. They were 50s and 60-year-olds. And so they scanned them with a real high level angiography, CT angiography. So they injected contrast dye into their veins and took a CT scan and, very carefully calculated every molecule of their cardiac vessels and calculated how much plaque was there. And what they found out was, they had almost no plaque. They had many of them had zero, and the ones that had some had a tiny amount, right? So it was like, this is weird. Why don't these people have?
And this is
what's that?
This is what they posted last week. Sorry,
this is what they posted last week. But just as importantly, that what they had to do is they wanted to see, well, what about another group of healthy people that don't have high cholesterol? So we've got these people whose average LDL cholesterol was 270, right? Which is top 1% of top 1%, like 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000 people has this much cholesterol, versus people with like average cholesterol, 120, right? Average level. And there was no difference. Cholesterol had no difference on the outcome. They all had the same amount of plaque. In fact, the people with the high cholesterol had a slightly less cholesterol, less plaque. So that's like, so these guys are saying, hey, wait a minute. We think that maybe that in the case of people that are metabolically healthy, LDL cholesterol doesn't seem to lead to vascular disease, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's the study that came out initially. Now they have 1 year data that they're following. So they're going to follow these people and repeat the scan another year later and say, is anything progressed? And most people say, well, it's only a year. What do you expect? Well, the principal researcher is a guy named Matt Budoff. He's at UCLA. He's at the Lundquist Center in UCLA. He is like the world's leading expert on this phenomenon. He says, absolutely, within 1 year, you can definitely see change because we have such precision measurements. We can measure things down to the millimeter, right? We can see it. So if anything's going to change, and they routinely, like for drug studies, they routinely use this. Like they use like a year or 6 months to say if there's been progression or regression. So that's accepted as part of the literature. So he's designed the study. They are collecting data for a year. They'll be done in February with the other data collection period. So they released their baseline data, which was already shocking. So after a year, they will rescan everybody. They're already scanning people, so they're getting some of the results back already, but they haven't shared that data. So they'll once again probably announce their findings, probably, I'm not sure, and then publish that. But what's the interesting thing that may happen, I suspect that in the vast majority of the people, they'll show no progression. I think some people will show possibly even regression, so that their plaque even goes away, which would be utterly like, what the hell? I mean, these people got LDL cholesterol 500 and their plaque is going away. Yeah, that will be obviously another game. That'll everybody's got their attention up right now. Like their attention's up. There is this sort of thing is what's the next step with that? And so there's been a lot of pushback. Like there's people saying, well, it's not long enough to tell. And we're like, well, the drug companies use less than a year to test this out. So it's good enough for those guys, right? And then there's people saying, well, these people are outliers. They're genetic freaks, right? They're this weird, and they actually screened everybody for genetic abnormalities. So they specifically ruled out genetic problems. And so what the researchers say, and I've talked to these guys extensively. I talk to them fairly frequently, in fact. They think that this is a normal physiologic phenomenon, that if you put a normal person that is maybe a little obese and you lean them out by going low carb, they will, almost all of them will see, or most of them will see, reduction in triglycerides, an increase in LDL, and an increase in HDL. And that is just the normal physiology based on the so-called lipid energy model, right? Mm-hmm. Lipid energy model says that when I am low on energy, like my liver glycogen is a little bit down, maybe there's not as much energy in my cells, how do I fuel my body, right? My liver says, guess what? Cells in the muscles need energy. So I'm going to traffic energy in the form of fats, free fatty acids, triglycerides, lipoproteins, and cholesterol. It all ships together. It just ships it out there. And so the prediction would be, what happens if you give energy back to the cells? You feed a bunch of carbs. What should happen? What the theory is that the liver should say, oh, wait, these guys are already full, so we're going to dial back our energy trafficking, right? So we should see less cholesterol in the blood. And so Nick Norwich, one of the authors on this study, has done that experiment. And he basically said, guess what? I have super high cholesterol. It was like, his LDL cholesterol was like 373 or 384 or something like that. Really high, super high. Like if you went to the doctor, he'd be like, oh my God, put you on a statin right away, right? It's like that panic number. Yeah. Like this is the highest I've ever seen in my life, in my career, right? He went from there. And so what does he do? He says, you know what? I bet if I eat a dozen Oreo cookies every day, in addition to what I normally eat, I'm going to have more energy in my cells and it's going to bring my cholesterol down. And so he did that. His cholesterol dropped 270 something points in 3 weeks, just because he ate Oreo cookies, right? Wow. So I mean, Oreo could say, hey, these are heart healthy Oreos, right? Yeah. It's like, should we all be eating Oreo cookies so we can have low cholesterol? I mean, that's he did it because it's so absurd, but it moves the narrative. It demonstrates the soundness of this model, this lipid energy model. Why do we have a high LDL cholesterol? Well, it's because I'm leaning out, because my liver glycogen stores are lower. It's because my muscles don't have, and my skin doesn't have as much energy stored in the cell. My fat isn't as robust and filled up. So, this is why it's doing it. And the question is, if it's high for that reason, is it damaging to our heart? And the following question to that, according to the Budoff study, which I just talked about, is that maybe not. Maybe it's not a problem. So this is sort of the, where this is going. You can't quite extrapolate it to say that LDL doesn't matter and everybody with high LDL should just ignore it. As some people might say. There's some people that will say that's true too. This study doesn't get you to that conclusion. We may get there at some point, depending upon what else is done, perhaps. I mean, that would. But
it gets us further.
What's that?
Along.
It brings you further along, and that would upend about 70 years of cardiology, and that's like saying the Earth is no longer orbiting the sun is no longer orbiting the Earth, right? This is a paradigm shifting sort of thing. So anyway, it's interesting.
I mean, yeah, it's super interesting. I think that's where a lot of this gets lost too, because I'm hyper aware of this a lot on talking about this on my channel. It's one of the reasons I have vegan guests on, actually, is because I think that's the point of science, is to challenge one another and actually hear all sides, so that, it's like, aren't you curious? Don't you actually want to know why this result is happening, versus just fight for your stance? Because that's not science anymore. That's just belonging to a group. Yeah. And, at this point, it's like we're seeing and we're finding things that science is ever changing and always will change and grow. That's like the one constant of science that we know. And so, it's fascinating to hear when you hear people talking about vegan versus carnivore. It's like, what are we doing here? Like, can't we just all just like talk about it, and learn what we might be able to teach each other? Well,
yeah, I mean, I like I said, I am not for restricting someone's choice of diet. The problem is, the problem I have with a lot of vegan, particularly vegan activists, is they want to tell me what I can eat and what I can't eat, and call me a murderer and an animal abuser and a rapist because I eat like every human on the planet has eaten for 100,000 years. Basically I eat meat. Like everybody has forever. So that's why I tend to push back on that sort of stuff. But you are right about this. There's guys out there saying that The science is settled. We don't need to debate this stuff. Discussion over. And we're like, and I said, well, why do you say that? Because all the scientists agree, all the doctors agree. And I said, wait a minute, I'm a doctor and I disagree. And there's a lot of others like me. What aren't we entitled to voice our opinions? It's kind of like, it's very, authoritarian, and it's quite frankly kind of, like you said, it's anti-scientific. To follow the science is anti-science. It should always be questioning the science. That's what science is designed to be, questioned continuously.
I've had a woman recently reach out to me, and I've had a couple of these, but she's actually a person who promotes veganism. She's a coach. She's got a big following, and she communicated how she recently she had no other choice but to eat meat because she got so sick. And, she does it all by the book. It's not that she's doing it a poor job, not supplementing, let's say. And she's fearful of coming out right now because of the backlash that may come with that. And that's really unfortunate. And I'm also not saying, here's my thing on the whole vegan thing. And then I wanted to ask you about some thoughts on fruit and dairy and all that. But this, just to say this, I can understand where vegans are coming from when it comes to empathy for animals. I do think that our food system's pretty disgusting, and big beef is pretty gross in a lot of ways. That's my opinion. I think that the way that you looked at industrialized farming, and not hating on the farmers, just the way that the animals are packed in to make them obese, and then they can't move, they can't run, they're given all these shots. Like, it's pretty gross. And it's hard to serve an entire country or cities without doing things like that because the demand is so high. So it's obviously a challenging problem to overcome. But I can understand it from that perspective, why they have that. Now, I'm with you though. It's like, don't absolutely just annihilate people because they choose to eat meat, which was what they were given to eat to help them be healthy and live. That's just unfair and ridiculous. But yeah, that's kind of my thought on that with the vegan thing. What is your thought on fruit and raw dairy and raw honey? I mean, I think we've talked about this a little bit before you're not dogmatic, but just genuinely, do you think it's helpful to people?
For some people, sure. I mean, for some people, yeah. For some people, it's harmful. I mean, I think it just depends on the person. I think you got to figure that out. I think it's helpful. Like if we take the hypothesis that food or nutrition has an impact on disease, there's some foods that make you sick and some foods that make you healthy. I mean, it's really, the onus is on you to figure that out, and so the easiest way to do that is do a complete elimination diet, do a carnivore diet, a strict carnivore diet for 3-6 months, and then add stuff back in. I mean, I think that makes sense. And I've seen people that, I mean, they're seduced by the fruit and honey, and it's sweet and it tastes good. And wow, I really like that. And they do that. And some of them do fine, but there's quite a few of them that don't. And that's, I've seen other physicians that have tried it and they're like, oh man, it brought my, one guy started having seizures again. One guy said, his joint pain came back. So it depends on the person, quite honestly. I'm not here to say that fruit is evil and no one should eat fruit. I mean, God, there's millions and millions and millions of people who eat fruit just fine on this planet. I mean, that's fine. But, I think it's just one of those things where what I push back on is the people that are out there saying you must include carbs or fruit or something in your diet, or you're going to have insulin suppression, your thyroid's going to fail, or you're going to have this or that, you're going to have hypercortisolemia. And I think that's just largely nonsense for most people. I mean, it could be transient, it could be temporary, but I mean, I've been doing, like I said, I've personally been doing it for 8 years without, really any fruit or honey or so little that it doesn't matter. Right. So I have to push back on that sort of approach that you must do this or you're going to get bad. Cause I just know too many people that clearly have demonstrated that's not the case. But at the same time, you won't hear me saying that fruit is poison or vegetables are poison and no one should eat them. Yes, there's problematic compounds in fruits and vegetables for some people, and some people definitely do better avoiding them. I do see that. I mean, because there's people out there I see all the time. It's like, you don't need to go carnivore, just eat a healthy omnivorous diet. I'm like, yeah, well, they've already tried that. Sorry, dude. I mean, they've tried it and they've tried it for years and it didn't work for them. Most people don't, most people try these other diets before they do carnivore. I see it over and over again. And so, yeah, I mean, it's whatever. I mean, I see people that do well on dairy. I do reasonably well on dairy when I do consume it. But I mean, I honestly do better without dairy. I mean, I feel 100%, I'm like straight up red meat, right? When I'm like 99%, I might be red meat and eggs and a little bit of dairy. And, it's not that much of a difference for me. maybe because I've gotten healthy enough and I've got such a other compensatory. I exercise a lot. I get good sleep. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I don't have bad habits. I don't go out there and get in bar fights and stuff like that. So I've got a pretty generally healthy lifestyle. So, I mean, yeah, maybe that's why I can do that. Whereas other people, they have to be strict and it's different. You talk from the difference between a 20-year-old and a 57-year-old is enormous when it comes to capacity to tolerate things. And I just think for whatever reason, it seems like the older we get, the less we tolerate carbohydrates. And so that's something that's also interesting.
Well, and it's funny with people that are athletes too. I'm an athlete. I've trail run. I used to be pretty competitive growing up in sports. Obviously, you're an athlete. There's a lot of people that want to know about how they can do the hardcore sports, let's say distance running, lifting a lot. It's like probably not the best course of action to have protein shakes. That's not what we're going for here. I used to like live on those things and I don't touch them anymore. What do you think about things like creatine or, in general, just how does one supplement to have more energy if they need it? Because if you're doing extreme things, sometimes you do have to take extreme measures, right? So maybe you got to supplement for something a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously normal human physiology, and then there's the freak athlete that's doing shit that humans aren't really designed to do. I mean, honestly, that's really what we're talking at. And so, first of all, I think you've got to maximize your recovery. If you're talking about I don't have enough energy, well, make sure you're getting enough sleep and that type of stuff. And then, like I said, I like you. I think that food is better for us to get our nutrition than from supplements. But let's just say, and I don't think whey protein is bad or anything like that. I think it's quite a good source of protein. So it's an excellent source of protein, to be honest. But I think that, what does it not have in there? Well, it doesn't have, certain vitamins and minerals, and doesn't have cholesterol, for instance. I mean, it doesn't have, certain bioavailable fats and free fatty or fat soluble vitamins and things like that you would be better served by eating an egg or chomping down a steak or something like that. So, I mean, but in the rare instance that like, hey man, I just don't have time to cook a steak or get a burger patty or, cook up some eggs or whatever. Then, I mean, that probably has a role there. I mean, it shouldn't be, I went for years where I would eat protein shakes every day. I mean, I have 2 or 3 of them a day. And I was sucking down 200 grams of protein a day in protein shakes, and it's very easy to do. I still consume a hell of a lot of protein. I'm still eating 300, 400, sometimes 500 grams of protein a day. I'm 260.
Do you do shakes though?
No, through meat.
I got you. Okay.
So I'm 200, I'm 200, I'm 250, 260 pounds right now. So I'm a big guy. So I need, I think I have the ability to sort of put that to work. I think that, creatine in the context of a carnivore diet, if you're eating a bunch of steak, it's almost superfluous. I mean, you think about it. I mean, creatine is going to have a benefit in a vegan for sure. Vegans, if you're a vegan athlete, you need to be on creatine, I think. If you're eating 3 pounds of meat a day, you probably have the creatine is going to provide minimal benefit in my view. I don't take supplemental creatine. I consume a lot of creatine, but I don't supplement it in any way. I don't get excited about supplements. Honestly, I'm skeptical about most of them. I think most of them make expensive urine. Most of them is a waste of money. I think there's a lot of hype. If you think about it, if you would just go back and look through popular media for the last 20 years, and you look what supplements were hot 20 years ago, guess what's happening? No one's taking that shit anymore. And then it's like every 3 years, the new hottest thing comes out, and it's HMB and chromium piconolate, all that shit's come and gone. It's all comes and goes. And the latest research.
It's the health industry.
What is? I mean, they do some rat study or they do some crappy study and they show this biomarker changes with this. And we think that this will project you to live to be 3,000 years old. Oh boy, let's, or we found some tribe in Bolivia that eats this and look at how good they are. Therefore you have to, I mean, it's so easy to people are so damn gullible. And I'm like, like for me, when people ask me about supplements, I say, well, when you changed your diet, did you notice something different? And they'll say, yeah, I noticed a lot. It was really, I lost 50 pounds. I felt, there's a very tangible, objective, and significant difference that you notice. And I said, well, what about when you took that supplement? Did you notice anything different? sometimes they say, well, I got a little buzz after I took it, probably because there's caffeine in it. But I mean, but most of the time it's like, I don't know, man, I couldn't tell. I mean, I would say 95% of the supplements I've ever taken in my life, I was like, I have no idea if it made a difference to me. There was no
Or
like
it's just a
objective thing, right?
placebo.
Placebo. I mean, I think like you said, you mentioned creatine. When I first started taking creatine back in 1995 or whenever it was, I noticed that I could bench press a couple extra reps. I mean, there was an objective benefit back then, right? So I think it does work, and there's a lot of data that supports that creatine is a well-tested, lots of research that says it's an effective supplement. Again, context, carnivore diet, don't need it in that context because it comes from meat. I mean, it's funny, all these carnosine, creatine, L-carnitine, some of the other ones that are being promoted, most of them are in friggin' animal products. You just eat the damn steak and you get it anyway.
Straight up. I know I've had a lot of companies reach out to me recently wanting to have me promote those things. I'm like, I don't know if you get it. I don't think you understand what I'm talking about here. It's getting it from the animal pretty much. Do you fast, by the way? I don't know if I ever asked you that.
No, not really. I mean, I eat 2 meals a day most days. So, I mean, I'll eat dinner at 5 and I won't eat the next day till like 11 o'clock. So whatever that is, 16 hours. I mean, I eat infrequently, but I don't sit there and say, today I'm going to do a 24-hour and tomorrow I'm going to do 36. I don't do that stuff. I just have no need for it, quite honestly.
I think your approach makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate like how we've been talking about it, because I think people, I mean, just even when I message this conversation to people and being like, all right, what are your questions? Right. I had so many people ask very specifics, like what are the macros that you need to do? And what about, thoughts on this particular type of food? Or what about, what somebody said, can I taste foods here and there if I'm a chef to try them and still be in the category to be a carnivore?
Well, I mean, I think you just have to stop labeling yourself. Don't care. It doesn't matter. I mean, honestly, you don't get, I mean, whatever you call yourself, whatever. Are you an American if you go to Europe? I mean, visit Europe. I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, it's like, don't worry about that stuff. And, the macro, yes, there are some, I mean, if we had more time, I could talk about when is higher fat more appropriate versus lower fat on carnivore, because I think there are some differences for certain conditions, but yeah, I mean, it's very much a very broad, generalized sort of eating pattern. And some of it's got to be intuitive. Some of it you got to figure out on your own. And I mean, I always get people, hey, Dr. Baker, am I allowed to have an avocado once a week? And I'm like, man, I'm not your mother. I don't, you don't need my permission. Do whatever, it's kind of like, just do what you want and see what happens. See how you do.
Yeah. I think that's the ultimate thing. And it's just real food, getting away from processed foods, and play with it and see how you do. So yeah, I really appreciate it. I mean, do you want to share where everybody can find you? I think everybody probably knows where to find you, but why don't you go ahead and do it?
Rivero is our company. It is all 50 states. We have licensed physicians in all 50 states that are accepting patients to help you with your chronic disease and hopefully get you off your medications and treat root cause and not just throw pills at people, which I think how healthcare should be practiced. And so we are just, we are literally a few weeks away from our official launch. We've got thousands of people on the waiting list, but we need, we'd love to get more people on there so we can take care of more and then hire more clinicians, because we have a bunch of clinicians that want to work for us. So, so Rivero.com is where you can go for that stuff. My social media, Instagram, I'm at Shawn, SHAWN, Baker, BAKER 1967. I'm on Twitter, or now X, as SBakerMD. I've got a YouTube channel, Shawn Baker MD. I've got another YouTube channel, Dr. Shawn Baker Podcast. And I'm also I hate to admit it, but I'm also on TikTok with Shawn Baker MD. So there's where you can find me.
I'm not even on TikTok. Yeah. All right, though.
I'm there dancing. I'm doing my dances over there.
Honestly, if you did that, it would go viral. You should
maybe if I get desperate, I'll start in there dancing. And
if anybody's interested in seeing Shawn do that, comment below. Maybe we can pressure him into it.
All right. All right. Thanks a bunch.
Right, Shawn.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. We'll talk soon, okay?